My mother she would give us a hard time sometimes, and she would say to us, I don't know what's wrong with you young people. You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you.
I'm Norman Solomon, and this is The Blue Road to Trump Hell. Our guest today, Sam Rosenthal. He's the political director of Roots Action and a longtime researcher and activist. He recently served 3 years on the steering committee of the Democratic Socialists of America National Electoral Commission. Sam, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
I thought I'd start out with a flashback. It was early in 2023, and you went to a national meeting of the Democratic National Committee in Philadelphia. It was cold there, not just because it was winter, but the kind of reception that you got. And I think looking back at that time when Joe Biden was gearing up to run for re-election as president, you were trying to alert people there that it wasn't such a good idea.
Yeah, that's right. And it seems like forever ago, but as you say, it was chilly in all senses of the word. We were out there on the street in the middle of February, outside of the hotel, trying to talk to DNC members, trying to talk to people in the Democratic Party orbit, and convince them that barreling forward with a Joe Biden coronation, really, which was what they were gearing up for, was a terrible idea. And that it was a bad idea, not just because of his age, because of the signs of physical and cognitive decline that were starting to become apparent, but also because Joe Biden was an unpopular incumbent, and there were lots of warning signs that uh, important parts, critical parts of the Democratic Party base were very disenchanted with the Biden administration, with Joe Biden's leadership, and were not enthusiastic about voting for him again. And that was particularly true for young people, for working class people, people who the Democrats were going to need to defeat Donald Trump again. And, we know what happened with that. But at the time, it was a laughable, risible topic that we were broaching, and we were treated like we were sort of lunatics at, these very otherwise somber proceedings.
Yeah, otherwise somber. And they were, of course, the smartest people in the room, and you were an intruder to set the stage. This was 16 months before the disastrous debate.
Elder care, making sure that we continue to strengthen our healthcare system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the with the COVID. Excuse me, with dealing with everything we have to do with. Look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President.
Where Joe Biden just fell in a tremendous pratfall that, of course, 4 weeks later forced him out of the race, leaving Kamala Harris just 107 days to run to the general election date. And so if you could just describe to us what the vibe was like. What did people say to you? These are the 450 people basically legally in charge of the Democratic Party. And you're there, you're passing out literature, you're talking to them. Roots Action has a mobile billboard going around the hotel where the DNC is meeting, and the billboard says, "Don't manipulate the primaries," a reference to how Joe Biden jerry-rigged the primary schedule so that he wouldn't have to face voters in New Hampshire when he'd come in fifth in 2020 in the primary there. Instead, he moved it to South Carolina, where he was sure to win. What were the responses like when you were broaching these issues with the DNC members?
Yeah, it was very interesting. So as you say, we made a bit of a splash there. We were very visible. We were basically the only dissenting voice who was physically present there. There were no, sort of people who were against the proceedings otherwise or in opposition to business as usual at the DNC, except for us. Otherwise, it was just a bunch of party functionaries who were, happy, I'm sure, to avail themselves of the free food and to pony up for the proceedings. But we were really sticking our necks out there. So I would say that we uh, had a very distinctly bifurcated response where we had this sort of above the surface reaction, which was the one I was just describing, where we had even the people who were even willing to engage with us, who were very few, but they would say, this is kind of ridiculous, right? What you're doing. I mean, do you really expect the Democratic Party to not have the incumbent president run? What's the alternative? What are you suggesting? Do you have a candidate in mind? And that was both members of the DNC and members of the media. I mean, one of the really striking things about this experience was how many members of the media were indistinguishable rhetorically from members of the DNC. They were just, basically towing the same party line that DNC members were. But then there was this sort of underside where we had a couple DNC members approach us privately and say, or sort of like on their lunch break, sneaking out the side door, as it were, to say, I agree with you. I just want you to know I agree with what you're saying, but in effect saying the ship's already in motion. It's too big a ship to turn around. And anyway, who would go with you? And I think they really wanted me to say, who are the people who are on your side? Because, maybe if there's a little momentum, we can get something happening here. But of course, there wasn't. There was, no one who was willing to step out of line with what the party wanted from them. And then the other group of people who took us very seriously and saw that there was, credence in what we were saying were international media. We talked to newspapers from the UK, from France, from Germany, and they all, considered this a legitimate critique of the president. They thought that the concerns we were raising about Biden were real and that, there should be some response from the party. But you didn't see any of that from US side media. So it was really interesting to kind of see how both of these currents were operating at the same time, whereas what the party was trying to project was this idea of consensus and unanimity that it was obvious that Biden would be the nominee again, and any suggestion to the contrary was just, laughable and ridiculous.
Consensus, unity, and conformity. And we've seen the results. The name of this podcast and my new book is The Blue Road to Trump Hell. And especially in retrospect, we can see that the Roots Action campaign, which went on for almost 2 years before the disastrous debate, the campaign that we called Don't Run Joe, was an effort to keep Democrats off of the blue road to Trump hell, which is where we are now. And I'm struck by that we and many others who were trying to avert this disaster were fighting against two tendencies. One was just go along to get along with Joe Biden and the leaders of the Democratic Party. And the other one was smaller, but still important among some progressives. We don't need both parties. We don't need either party. We just don't want them. And I wonder, as somebody who's done progressive electoral work for many years, how you think it is possible or desirable to navigate between those two tendencies. The bulk of people who are anti-Republican go along with the Democratic Party no matter what, don't raise difficult questions. And then there are smaller numbers, but perhaps decisive numbers who stay home, who vote third party, who just say, I'm sick of the Democratic Party. Why bother with them?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that we hear and see a lot. I think it's completely understandable that folks are frustrated with the Democratic Party. And, I count myself among their number. I think that most members of the Democratic Party are not people who I agree with politically. They're people who are sort of maybe, more progressive on some social issues, but by and large are still people who are upholders of the primacy of capital and wealthy people in this country, not people who are willing to rock the boat, people who are very beholden to the donor class, and in some cases, I think indistinguishable from Republicans. Where I kind of get off the boat, though, is that I don't think that the parties are completely interchangeable. Yeah, I think that we've seen, especially over the last, 10 or so years, the Republican Party, which has always been a far right party, has really welcomed ultra nationalists and fascists into its ranks happily, and people who have been brought in by the MAGA movement, by Donald Trump, are those who truly believe that the United States should be a white Christian nation and are operating from that premise. And we're seeing, I'm here, I live in Washington, D.C. Our city has been terrorized for months now by roving gangs of ICE thugs who are disappearing people, who are throwing them into vans, who are tearing families apart. People don't know where their loved ones have gone. And that's something that we would not have gotten in the shape under a Harris administration, flawed and disappointing though it may have been. So I do think there's a difference between the parties. And the other issue I take, I guess, with hewing to more of a third party line and wanting to depart completely from the two-party system, which I think would be good, it's sort of in theory, is that there are significant structural barriers to succeeding electorally on a third-party line. There are exceptions to this, of course, depending on the place where you live. Different municipalities have different rules, but by and large, if you want to win statewide, you want to win national office, statewide office, it's really, really difficult to do so without running on one of the two major party lines. Has to do with everything from access to data to voter lists that you need, all the way down to where you appear on a voter's ballot, or if you even appear on a voter's ballot, depending on how you're running. So I think in our current incarnation of, our political system's current incarnation, the way things are set up, I still think that there's a lot to be gained from progressives, from leftists, Democratic socialists running in Democratic Party primaries as we have been, beating corporatist Democrats and then running on the Democratic line in general elections. I still think that is the most viable winning strategy. And I really think that it should be our mission as leftists to win. I think that we should not engage cynically in the electoral project. We should engage in it because we're serious about winning. And so when you mobilize volunteers, when you ask people to give their evenings, give their weekends, give their money, I think that you owe it to them to sincerely try to win the elections you're running in. And that also means you have to have a winning strategy. And right now, I think that's the winning strategy.
There is the dilemma or the paradox, maybe, that reasons for cynicism are very much available. There's plenty of them. At the same time, cynicism can immobilize people so that they don't engage in the electoral process. There has been a pretense among some, well, hey, we don't need the elections. Why do they matter? And as you allude to, we're living through in 2025 just the terror that ICE alone is inflicting in many communities around this country, how important elections turn out to be.
Absolutely. And I also think that it's just one of the best ways of communicating your politics to the electorate, to individual voters. For me, a big part of the project of what we should be doing on the left right now is we should be doing a lot more proselytizing. I still think we're in this phase that's almost primordial where we have these politics that have been suppressed, shunted aside in this country for a long time. And we need to make the case for them. I think that you saw that in Bernie Sanders' presidential campaigns. You saw it in the success of people like AOC. You're seeing it now with Zohran Mamdani. It's not that we think that these people are angels or that they're these perfect people and they can do no wrong and that, we're never going to criticize them when they're in office. That's not at all the case. It's that these people are good vessels for the politics we want to talk about. I mean, that we want more people to be thinking about the idea that inequality in this country is a choice, that we can redistribute wealth in this country, that healthcare could be a right, housing could be a right, that there are ways that people can live working one job and not be completely immiserated, that medical debt doesn't really need to exist. That's a policy choice that it does exist. And so I think that running these campaigns, having candidates talking about these things is one of the best ways we can expose people to these ideas who, maybe don't have a DSA meeting to go to in their town or city where they live, or don't have the time to sit down and read some political theory. I think that, elections and candidates are it. They're not the only way you can do it. There are many ways you can do it, but it's one of the reasons that I'm sort of a believer in the electoral project.
There's a paradox, I guess. I think of the word which maybe is not in fashion in this century, dialectics, that truths can exist that are in contradiction to each other. And rather than choosing one or the other, we need to acknowledge both and see how they combine, or we can move forward to incorporate, acknowledge, and move beyond those truths. And one aspect, I think, has to do with elections themselves, that when you look at history, social movements make change. Everything from Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, the environment movement, and so much else. That didn't come from people who were elected. It came from social movements that propelled a force from the grassroots and really compelled people in elections sooner or later, people in electoral positions, to move forward and at least partly respond to grassroots beliefs, social movements, and the power, pardon the expression, of people at the grassroots to make the change. So, on the one hand, social movements are the motor. At the same time, if you only have social movements that have some momentum and you don't ever change who is in power, who's running Congress, who's in the White House, then you don't get the change from the government that you're desperately needing.
Absolutely. And I think, we're seeing that increasingly, at least at the national level, the right wing is enjoying more and more of a structural advantage. And depending on the outcome of, a case currently in front of the Supreme Court, that advantage could even grow. So what you're saying is absolutely true, that you want people in office who are at least pressurable. And I mean, I think this goes back to this argument about whether the Democrats and Republicans are the same party or different. Donald Trump is not subject to pressure from the left. He does not care. There's nothing that the left can do really to lean on him except for something incredibly extreme, and I don't think we want to go there necessarily right now. But electing people who are sympathetic to what a social movement is saying, I think puts pressure on the people who are adjacent to those electeds who maybe are not as sympathetic but care about the things that all politicians care about, reelection, uh, good favorabilities, etc. And so, yeah, it is a dialectic process, and like all dialectical processes, it needs to go through many iterations to realize some sort of forward progress. And as I said earlier, it's still a very young movement. This sort of new left boom is really only 10 years old, I think, at the outside. Maybe if you want to go back to Occupy, a bit older than that. But we still have a lot of ground that we need to make up and many more phases we need to go through as we sort of move our way towards progress. So um, I would just encourage people to, I know it's hard sometimes, but to have patience and be optimistic about what we can achieve if we're patient and we're steady in applying the pressure, but within the confines of what's currently achievable, given the capacity we have. We're still a small movement. We need to grow.
If we're going to learn from the past in this way, the reality is, and certainly Roots Action experienced this with the Don't Run Joe campaign that went more than 18 months, we kept saying to mainstream media, to go along to get along Democrats, to people who are frankly sucking up to the Biden White House, this is a course leading to disaster. Politically, in terms of not connecting with working class voters and the, to put it mildly, foibles and inadequacies of Biden's ability to articulate, this is a train heading to disaster, and we ought to stop the train and move it somewhere else. So that was one message we were creating. The other was, unfortunately, among some people who self-identified on the left, we were trying to convince them, sometimes very unsuccessfully, that if Biden lost, or then Harris lost, and Trump returned to the White House, the left, progressives, decent people would be on their heels for 4 years. We'd be completely on the defensive. And that's what's played out this year. I mean, it's a historic tragedy. We are on the defensive completely. We are trying to mitigate the damage, or meditate the damage, however you want to say it. We're trying to mitigate the damage so that it doesn't get worse than it has to be. But this is clearly a catastrophe for the United States. It's a catastrophe for the world, what the Trump administration is doing. If we're going to learn from this, then it seems we have to recognize that blind obedience to people in power in the Democratic Party is a ticket to disaster. And if we're not willing to fight the right by uniting against them in a general election, then we are going to be on the defensive ongoing.
Absolutely. I think that the left is always in a stronger position when there's a Democrat in office, when Democrats are in power, because it's much harder to ignore our demands and it's much harder to ignore the bit of gravity that we can exert, influence that we can exert on the party. As you say, Trumpism, the sort of popular front that we've had to forge against Trumpism really muddies political distinctions and issues. And the mainstream of the Democratic Party, the corporatist strain of the Democratic Party, would really be happy to keep running campaigns that say, we're not Donald Trump over and over again, because it allows them to elide the question of who are you if you're not Donald Trump? And this is the politics we've seen three elections in a row now, basically. They have a 33% win record running it, but it doesn't matter too much when that sort of greases the wheels of the operation, greases the wheels of the consulting class, and so on. And so what we need to do is to try to win on the idea that just saying we're not Donald Trump or saying we're not JD Vance or whoever the candidate is going to be in 2028, assuming we have, normal elections, is not sufficient. That's not a winning politics. And we need a projective, progressive vision for the future that's appealing to voters. Just saying we're going to undo Trumpism or we will not continue Trumpism, I think is really not going to be persuasive for many voters. You still see that there's just polling out today on sort of the major issues around the economy and immigration, Republicans still have better favorables than Democrats do. And I think that is largely due to the fact that Democrats do not have a coherent politics that they can run on right now, because the mainstream of the party has just gotten lazy about running against Trump and not running on good ideas. And so unfortunately, there's been carnage already. There's probably a lot more to come from this administration. And it's going to be very tempting to once again say, oh, well, we're just going to be different than the last 4 years were, without having to be forced to say, how will you be different? What will you do? And I think it's up to us, it's up to the left to really put pressure on the mainstream of the party via candidates, via popular movements, to say, no, you must do better than that. You have to articulate a vision that's appealing to people. And I think we know what that vision is or what that vision should be.
Immediately after Trump won the election that would bring him back into the White House, Bernie Sanders put out a tweet and he said, it's not surprising that the working class would abandon the Democratic Party after the Democratic Party abandoned the working class. And it is stunning, decade after decade, throughout my lifetime, the Democratic Party got most of the working class vote. And the cliche about the Republican Party back when they had country clubs, I suppose, more, oh, they're the country club party. And it has flipped through a sort of demagogic claim to be populist coming from the right-wing Republicans. It's just, it's astonishing and very disturbing. Historically, the working class can be drawn into a fascist party and a fascist movement.
Absolutely. It's clear that the Republicans, when they're in power, do hardly anything for the working class, if anything at all. The one of the biggest legacies of the last Trump term is a huge tax cut for wealthy people. And I expect that beyond terrorizing working people in this country, Trump will do very little for them in this term as well. But it's really, the question is, how did Democrats lose working class support? It's tempting, but I think incorrect to say, well, the working class was sort of wrested from the Democrats' hands by Republicans, and that just really doesn't ring true to me. Chuck Schumer famously said, "Oh, for every, and I'm paraphrasing, I won't get the quote exactly, but basically, for every working class vote we lose in a city, we'll pick up two college-educated voters in the suburbs."
For every blue collar Democrat we will lose in Western PA, we will pick up two, three moderate Republicans in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And you can repeat that in Ohio and Illinois and Wisconsin.
And that pivot has just really fallen on its face. I mean, there is no evidence that Democrats have executed that successfully, or that that pivot has led to a coherent politics that anyone is buying. So now the Democrats are in this position where their sort of supposed base of the professional, managerial, white collar workers who they were going to pivot to and could apparently cast enough votes that they would be electorally dominant has just not materialized. And yet they are unwilling to pick back up the policies that sort of made them the party of working class voters through the middle part of the 20th century. Um, so, how will they do that? There are myriad policies that we've suggested, progressives and the left have suggested and championed, that they've derided as not tenable, not realistic. Hillary Clinton said that they were pie in the sky, sort of everyone gets a free puppy type policies when Bernie Sanders was articulating them. But they're exactly the kind of policies that would benefit working people in their day-to-day lives, that would lessen inequality in this country. And those are the kind of policies the party needs to run on. If they're unwilling to run on those policies, I think they are in for a protracted, slow decline, and really a slide into sort of irrelevance as a political party.
We periodically hear how we need a third party, especially around election time. And yet the comparisons to Europe really fall flat because the parliamentary system is set up structurally to make possible inroads, whether it's the Bundestag in Germany or elsewhere, to have third parties, to have 5, 6, 7 parties maybe in a parliament with some power and ability to build coalitions. That's just structurally not the case in the United States, which explains why, after several decades, the Green Party has never come anywhere near close to electing a single member of Congress, whereas we have people like Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar who would only be able to get into Congress and did get into Congress because they were quote unquote Democrats. And it reminds me of the historic reality that while we often hear about how the Democratic Party is a big tent, if we had a parliamentary system, and again, we do not, a lot of people in the Democratic Party would not be in the same party.
Yeah, I think AOC very famously said, if we were in a parliamentary system, Joe Biden and I would not be in the same party, and she got a lot of flack for that. But it's absolutely true. Joe Biden's politics are not my politics. They don't appear to be AOC's or Rashida Tlaib's or any of the so-called squad members. But it's just wish casting. It's likelier that we'll be able to pack the Supreme Court and add DC as a 51st state and all these things that I would love to see us do before we get parliamentary politics in the United States. We're stuck with our current political system. One of the things that I've done a lot of canvassing in my time, and one of the first questions you get when you go canvassing often from voters is this person a Democrat? You say, I'm here to talk about a candidate. I want to sort of sell you on this person. And they say, okay, are they a Democrat? That's the first question out of people's mouths often, because many, many voters in this country, people in this country, have a very strong sense of, well, I'm a this party member. And we might think that's very flawed. I don't really know how you came to that conclusion. It's sort of illogical given the politics you're describing to me, whatever. We can kind of sit on our high horse and, sit in judgment of these people. But the truth is that that is how a lot of people make a determination about who they're going to vote for come November, come election day. And so being able to say to people, yes, they're a Democrat, yes, they're on the Democratic ballot line, isn't the end of the conversation, but it certainly keeps the door open long enough for you to make your pitch and to talk about, again, the politics we want to talk about. So I would encourage people who think that the next move we should be making as the left is to create our own party and finally rid ourselves of the Democratic Party and all that that entails. I would encourage those folks to go out, do some canvassing, do some electoral cycles, and see what they think that experience would be like if you say, well, I'm not here from the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. I'm here from another party, a party you've never heard of before. It's going to be very, very tough, is my suspicion on those doors. I'm not saying it's going to be tough forever. I'm saying right now in the year 2025, it's going to be really hard. And so we have to be clear-eyed about what the opportunity structure currently presents to us.
I've been speaking with Sam Rosenthal, the political director of Roots Action. This is The Blue Road to Trump Hell, hosted by me, Norman Solomon, executive produced by Harrison Malkin, music by R.J. Eskow. My new book is The Blue Road to Trump Hell, How Corporate Democrats Paved the Way for Autocracy. You can download it for free at blueroad.info.